Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Alta Live. This is our special Halloween edition, can we say? We've never really done a Halloween edition, but we've got some great stories recently published in Alta by Lauren Markham, both about ghost towns, really looking at ghost towns from two different angles. We figured what better day to discuss with Lauren her research and her adventures in Ghost Town than October 30th. So, welcome to everyone and a big welcome to Lauren.
Hello.
Lauren has written about ghost towns now twice for Alta, so we're going to send you links to those. She is a fiction writer, essayist, and journalist. Her work most often concerns issues related to youth, migration, the environment, and the great state of California. She's the author of The Faraway Brothers, Two Young Migrants, and the Making of an American Life, and A Map of Ruins on Borders and Belonging. Do not worry, we will send you links later this afternoon on where you can find Lauren's wonderful work as well as read her articles in Alta. Before we dive in to ghost towns, oh, it's great to see the regulars know in the chat. We love to see where you're zooming in from. Hi, Ramona and Austin. Ramona, California, and Austin, Texas. Ramona and Austin are not people. Oh, and Arnold. We have all names of towns zooming in. Alta Journal is the quarterly magazine. This is our quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. We've got this big, beautiful magazine. We also have a website, new content published daily, a ton of exciting newsletters like the Monday Book Review, a weekend read every Saturday. So I encourage you to sign up for our newsletters. We also host the California Book Club, a free monthly book club and conversation with some of the most important, interesting, pioneering authors in California and the West. So these kind of free things that we do all build up to our big, beautiful magazine, one which we are hoping you will consider subscribing to. Membership at Alta costs $50 a year. You get 4 gorgeous issues and a special gift. Right now, that gift is a book of the first cartoons that appeared in the first 5 years of Alta. So it's a big book of really funny, hilarious, charming cartoons that have appeared in the back pages of Alta. You can visit us at altaonline.com for the archives of our 7 years of Alta. And I hope you'll consider supporting us. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions you want about ghost towns. You can also check in the chat, as I see so many of you are doing. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. And with that, Lauren, welcome to
Thank
Alta
you.
Live. Where
So,
are you zooming in from today?
Berkeley, California. Berkeley, California.
All right, I'm right
I
across the
hope
bay.
Beth pointed out that I sort of have a ghost in my screen, so
There could be a ghost.
we're gonna
We will
we'll find
at,
out.
at the end of
Yeah.
Alta Live today, it will be revealed. I wanted to so as I kind of briefly mentioned, you've written twice about ghost towns for Alta, really
Yes.
within the month of October. The
Yeah.
first was published um in our current issue. The current issue is focused on reckonings of the West. Can you tell us a little bit about the focus of that article, and particularly your fascination with Bodie, California, and why
Yeah.
that's your favorite ghost town, I think you
Yeah. I'm really interested in ghost towns as an edge case of sort of like a both and. I have always been drawn to ghost towns. I am actually like writing a novel right now that's sort of set in like a version of Bodie. I have a cat named Bodie who you might hear meowing in the background. Just on cue, I think because he heard me say his name. I have always, I come from, I'm like a fourth or fifth, sort of depending on when you start counting, generation Californian, and I grew up steeped in sort of lore and mythology within my family and also like within my schooling about the Wild West and like the kind of pioneer era. So I've always been fascinated by ghost towns. What this article is looking at is like the way ghost towns are effectively like memorials to a fictional past. They're memorials to a pioneer era that's really an erasure story of all of the violence that was kind of endemic to the making of California, to the making of the West as we know it, which this, issue so beautifully kind of reckons with. So I'm interested in ghost towns as these sort of like fun, wacky places to visit that sort of conjure the imagination, and also the way they're sort of uh, built to conjure a particular imagination that's really like a whitewashing of the past.
You speak particularly of the kind of the massacres that have happened with indigenous people, as well as the Chinese immigrants who helped build so many of these ghost towns. And folks, you can read about that in Lauren's article. I was wondering, what about the women? There's 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 a lot of there's a lot of mention of, like, ladies of the night and
Yeah,
prostitutes and
yeah,
sex
yeah,
trafficking.
yeah.
Um, but what about the role of women in these towns? Can you talk a little bit about, do you know
Yeah,
any?
it's really interesting because that's something, my main character is basically like a woman who's been sort of scammed and ends up in of the novel that hopefully one day all of you will read if I ever actually finish writing it. But it's the story of a woman who's kind of been scammed and ended up in this place. And certainly yeah, there was like a mass subjugation of women. And the interesting thing I think about ghost towns is like the red light district and the ladies of the night are part of this kind of caricatured past, right? That is kind of propped up as like, ooh, like there was a murder a day in Bodhi's heyday, and like, all these women were like ladies of the night, and there's this sort of like mystique around them. And I think what that ignores is two things. Like one, the massive subjugation of women, not just in California, not just in these ghost towns, but like, worldwide, and in the kind of era of the making of of the California statehood, the 18 post gold rush, like 1850s and beyond. But it also ignores like agency of women. Their sex work movements today are always talking. I'm sorry, you can hear my cat meowing in the background. Sex work movements today are always talking about, how important it is to not sort of only victimize sex workers, or to not victimize sex workers, and not think of it as like merely like a subjugated, powerless class of people, but sometimes people who are like actually choosing to do this work, sometimes with many options. And I think in the case of a lot of the women in the Bodhi era, like because of lack of other options in the economy.
Where is Bodie exactly?
Bodhi is in the Eastern Sierra. So basically, if you are in the Bay and you go up through Yosemite and up Tioga Pass and down to like Mono Lake and Lee Vining, you take a left on 395, and like then you take a right on a really long dirt road and you get to Bodhi.
I mean, Bodie's a ghost town. How
Yes.
do we define a ghost town?
Yes.
What, you
Yeah.
know, what's
This
the
is something that comes
does
up
it
in my
hit, like,
article.
does it have to
Yeah.
hit a certain amount of checkpoints to be
No,
considered?
I think it's more, I think it's, I don't know that if there's, I don't know that there's like an international association on ghost town recognition, but effectively the ghost town is a town. It's a boom town, So I actually think we could expand our definition beyond what we often think of ghost towns in the United States. But a ghost town is effectively a boom town that, pretty quickly was a big place with lots of activity, and then pretty quickly went bust in some way, or no longer had the kind of relevancy or economy to support the people who had long lived there. So often we think about ghost towns as places like Bodie, or places like Dodge City, Kansas, or places like Malakoff Diggins, which is in the foothills of the Sierra on the western side.
That humbug?
Humbug, exactly, formerly Humbug, known because people got there and they were like humbug because
No gold.
yeah, there was no there exactly. It didn't live up. It didn't live up to its. Turns out, no one really made it rich in the gold rush off of gold, right? They made it rich off of other things. Um, so, a ghost town is, we think of these towns in these sort of like Western boom towns of the gold rush era, of the kind of like westward expansion era. But in fact, like, couldn't we look? I mean, I'm thinking of the movie Nomadland, if anyone saw that, and the protagonist, Frances McDormand, in that movie kind of ends up in a van and living kind of on the road. But there's a scene at the end where she goes back to the town where she used to live, and it was like a company town. I forget what it was for. Was it like a mining town of some kind, or was some kind of industry that went bust? house. And so therefore, like, her house was empty. Like, the house didn't have value anymore. There was no one living. There were these like ghostly neighborhoods. So is that not too a ghost town in the same terms? Or some of the like oil boom places in the Bakken, for instance?
And you asked the question, I think,
It
in
was
your
in
article.
Nevada. Thank you, the Nomad Land. Donna
Oh,
just let us know.
um, you asked the question in your article, is it the town itself that is the ghost that has become,
Yeah.
the once alive dead? So I want to kind of move into your second piece for Alta, which is you and a friend, so appropriately named Salem, go on a road trip. I mean, in reading it, it felt very impromptu, and you changed
Yeah.
plans in the middle of it, which gives me extreme anxiety. Um, but you have kind of a plan to go explore 3 or 4 ghost towns
Yep.
in California.
Yep.
And the one I found, well, I found all of it interesting,
Yep.
but is it Shasta City
Yes. Yeah,
that
Shasta City.
has like the hologram old
Yep.
miner and it
Yep.
just a total tourist? Tell us
Yep.
about that place.
Yeah, so this is Shasta City, which is right outside of Reading. And before Reading became as big as, basically, Shasta City was the boomtown of that region until they had the railroad run through Reading instead of Shasta City. And then the county seat moved. And then, so basically, the town sort of crumbled and became a ghost town because of this. When I explore this in the piece, like, because of this one fateful decision, this one fateful thing happened to the city, and all of a sudden it kind of moved into irrelevancy, right? So now it's cool and beautiful, and there's sort of like ruined buildings that kind of like evoke like Greek ruins on the southern side, I believe. And then there are these old buildings that you can still go into. So the old post office and courthouse and then jailhouse, you can kind of go in, and there's a really interesting museum. But when you go downstairs, that's the dungeon, and that's where the prisoners were held, and there's sort of this like dungeon zone. And when you walk across it, sorry, this is a spoiler, when you walk into this dark room, which is what Salem did, you trip some sort of like alarm, and or you trip some sort of wire, and this holographic guy comes on screen and goes, oh, and he it's sort of like a ghostly figure, and he tells this like super hokey story of being a scammer and how he ended up in jail because all the ladies, he took advantage of the ladies, and it's just like super hokey and silly. It's also scary as hell because you're going into a dark place and you kind of are like feeling ghosts, and then this, even though it's hokey, like this booming voice just comes out of nowhere. So Salem she went in first and she bolted out. She was like, that was not cool. That was not cool. She yelled to like nobody, to the
Like a
ghost.
motion detector sets off
Yeah.
Graham,
Yes.
like
Exactly.
Scooby-Doo
A motion
minor.
detector. That was the line I was looking for. Yes.
Yeah, this sounds very Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Very Scooby-Doo.
Allegedly, there
Yes.
is a ghost. People have felt what has been,
The
I
woman
love
at
like old unsolved mysteries ghost stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
What had happened in the basement jail?
Yeah, so people often, we ask the ranger, and by we I mean Salem. It's like I now want to take her reporting everywhere because she has no inhibitions, and she's like, "Hi, can I ask you a question?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's like my least favorite part of a reporter is just like being a reporter, is just going up to random people and making them talk to me." Salem is great at it. The reluctant ranger, the reluctant to speak to us ranger, talked about how a lot of people say they feel a ghostly presence down in the dungeon. But what people have really seen, and that could be because it's spooky down there, because it's dark, because lots of people were in prison there, some people died there, they're wanted. Before you go down there, they're like wanted, those old fashioned like wanted posters, from the newspapers everywhere. But it's the courthouse that has the ghost that people most commonly talk about, which is a little baby that they see in the corner, sometimes in a cradle and sometimes just sort of sitting there.
Is there a related story as to
We
what might
couldn't find
explain?
one. Yeah, we couldn't find a related story to the baby. It just seems to be what people have seen.
And there's a gallows behind. Is
Yes, that was incredibly disturbing. Yeah, there's a
it
gal.
really still?
Yeah, it's like hanging there. Luckily, they haven't done any hokey things that, they could have, which is, and I've seen in like an old castle in Slovenia, of course, like a fake person hanging there, which is just sort of awful and
Oh, yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah.
But this is this thing is that like this is this, there's the fun road trip story I wrote, and then the sort of questioning like what ghost towns mean and what they stand for story that I wrote. And they're really, they're they're of course in conversation with one another, not just because they're in the same place. Like the fun of it, the sort of like, ooh, scary kind of spooky movie, Halloweeny stuff is part of the way the history of California becomes like a sideshow spectacle, like a fun, easy, light diversion, as opposed, and a true diversion, not just in the like fun meaning of the word, but diverting our attention from the actual history of a place, both the context of genocide, the horrific treatment of so many people of color, of women, like during this time. But also just like, yeah, we would just hang people in the back. Isn't that fun and funny? You know what I mean? Like there was a
Yeah.
bigger a day in Bodie. It's like, that's awful. You know, that's not good. But it's propped up as this sort of Western fantasy fun.
It's interesting. There must be ghost towns throughout the world,
Yeah.
obviously. Why do you think that the West, ghost
Mm,
towns of the West, hold such a mythic
yeah.
place in our lore?
I think because there were the places, because Westward Expansion does and Manifest Destiny does, and they were hubs of Manifest Destiny in action, right? Of people coming to make it rich and actually finding quite a bit of hardship. And that hardship is what, you know, the sort of the hunger and the greed and the need and the hardship in these, you know, often for newcomers, like pretty for like, you know, white Europeans coming here, like pretty harsh landscapes. Like someone just put in the chat that Bodie yesterday, okay, it's October, got 2 inches of snow. Like it's a really difficult winter there and a very hot summer there. So I think it was the very intense places and very intense context. And I think, you know, like I actually haven't seen that many, but what's that show? Like Deadwood, right? Was a really popular show. Like that's basically a place that would be a ghost town now, right? All of those old westerns, like a lot of the sort of saloon doors and the guy barreling,
Yeah.
like that's that Western cowboy mythology mixed with then in the California context, the gold rush, you know, if you come here, you can strike it rich mythology that I think really captures our imaginations. And also we teach it again and again. So it's self-fulfilling, right? Like in my California history class growing up, in third grade, we did something called the California pageant, which each one of us was played a character from California history. And the first person, like the first character was Junipero Serra. You know, this was in the 90s that we were taught that California history began with Junipero Serra. It began with a colonizer. It began with someone, you know, who ran the missions, who you know, was at the helm of like unspeakable atrocities against Native people.
Just out of curiosity, who were
Yeah.
you for the
I
California?
actually had a really cool role that still, I was thinking about this the other day. I was someone named John Grabinski. So this must have been like 1991. And I was someone named John Grabinski, who was the newest. I think I was one of the latest characters. We had a Christy Yamaguchi. Remember that we had,
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, I know. Yep.
Fremont's own.
Skater, yes. Oh, Fremont's own. Okay. So Christy Yamaguchi, and I think I was the latest one, which was John Grabinski, who was a policeman who died in the Oakland fire, sort of directing traffic and people getting to safety, which was like a really beautiful one. Yeah. So, and I like was
What
corresponding with
a
the family. It
what a
was really beautiful.
span.
I
Junipero
know. I
Serra and
know.
Christy Yamaguchi.
I
That's a
know.
real
Yeah.
collection of Californians in there.
Yeah.
Um, you and Salem, I gotta remind
Yeah.
people, the friend really is named Salem. It's just so perfect. You
Yeah.
go to Eureka of all,
Yes.
which I don't think of as a ghost town, but that is where we encounter all sorts of ghost
Oh,
stories.
yes. So it's interesting because this is where we're on the way, you know, to Eureka, and part of what we're going to is a kind of the ghost town of Falk, which was a former logging town. But it's such a ghost town that you can like there aren't buildings and the same sort of trappings or remnants of a town. It's actually more ruins. Like you can go and see old stovepipes and you can sort of see a chimney. It's like you know, truly ruined town. But this was a boom town where like hundreds of people, I mean not thousands, but a couple hundred people lived there as they were like going deep into the forest, bringing the redwoods out. They had a rail line and they would bring the tree, you know, the lumber out and then bring it to the mill and put it on the river, like take it down on ships from Eureka. So that's just a little bit outside of Eureka. So we went there, but then we went to the city of Eureka, which is honestly only because of its port. Like this is what was interesting is that, you know, I spoke before about how Shasta City it was some geopolitical decisions that rendered it a ghost town, right?
Well,
Sometimes
yeah.
it's like the mine dries up or, the company goes bust. But in that case, it was like, well, the railroad goes somewhere else now. So like that's where the merchants need to be, and that's where the jobs are, and that's where the activity is. And in the case of Eureka, like they have a really protected port in Eureka. So though it was it was a boom town of like the gold rush and post gold rush, like it could stay relevant and stay in activity. But it was a massive boom town, and like a couple of years, I had this is in the piece, and I don't remember the exact stats, but it's something like it was three saloons in the
Oh yeah.
1850s, and then it was like you know 60
67.
years exactly, like just 10 years later. Lots of brothels, etc. So it sort of had the same vibe, but just the seaside version of Bodie, right? But it just didn't go bust. But the interesting thing that started happening there is that we went on a ghost tour. So we went on a haunted tour of Eureka, which like highly recommend, was totally spooky. And this is where our terms started to get a little murky. Like, is a ghost town a town where like a ghost town is a town that has gone bust, but also part of the town itself is the ghost, but also there's this notion within a ghost town that there are ghostly figures there. There's ghostly remnants of the past. It's spooky. There are actually ghosts in a ghost town. And so we were in the town of Eureka, which is not a ghost town in technical terms, but it's sort of a town filled with ghosts because it has the same remnant, like this same historical context, right? And that imaginary of Wild Wild West is still very present there. And there are lots of ghost sightings in Eureka, and we learned about dozens of them, including the ghosts who lived in our hotel room, which was very
Room
terrifying.
24
Room 24,
at,
apparel people at the inn at Second and C, I think it's called. It was the historic Eagle House. I think it's now
yeah,
called
the Eagle
Second
House.
and C.
Okay.
Yeah, so we got a tour of the rooms from the people who worked there, as well as this like haunted. So we stayed there because we knew that there were like whispers of hauntings, but it turned out we picked a haunted room, and that was terrifying.
It was terrifying. Now, the haunting that had been reported in the room,
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, was that someone was taking a bath and they felt someone brushing their hair.
yes. And it was not their husband. Like they turned around to be like, "Oh, my husband," and it wasn't their husband.
And this is the room you chose to sleep in.
Yes, but we didn't know. We were like, let's not choose the haunted one because like why? We're in a haunted hotel. But then so the people who ran the hotel were like, yeah, they showed us the haunted rooms and told us what had happened there. And then we chose room 24, which was near the haunted rooms. And then Alex, who gave us the ghost town tour, was like, room 24? Oh, they don't know. Of course that's haunted. I'll tell you all about what happened in room 24. So yeah, room 24.
When you spoke about Alex,
Yeah.
who gave you this ghost tour,
Yeah.
and mentioned something that really struck me, which was that there there were certainly ghost stories that this sighting happened here. There's the lore that this had happened here, but it's really there was so much more of the participants of the ghost tour share their own experiences, and that's what kind of keeps this energy alive.
Yeah, it's an additive. Like all ghost stories are like this. We know that's just true about urban legends, right? That it's not just the original story, but it's people's memories of the original story or their feelings about the story. Or, Alex would say a lot like, and now when I told the story, right before I told people that the guy had slit his own throat, a woman on one of my tours, right before I said that, she just went like this inexplicably. And we all gasped when I said that he had slit his throat. And I don't think she was making this up. She was like a really, she honestly like she identifies
Alex
as
is a
a
believer.
historian. Yeah, yeah. Alex is a believer. Although interestingly, like at the end, she sort of admitted to us, I don't know that this is in the piece, that she's like, yeah, I've actually never had paranormal experiences myself. I'm fascinated by them. But she's much more like, she does this through a historical lens. She sees herself as like a community historian. But like so many of her stories were not just about the ghosts themselves, but about spooky things that had happened while giving the ghost tours, and like people's engagement with, and connections to paranormal were just as much a part of it as like the actual ghost story.
The woman who felt the bullet wound.
Yes, who kind of doubled over in pain right when they entered the room where someone had been shot, some like mob guy had been shot in the belly.
Well, I have to ask then, have you ever had a paranormal experience?
Not like of the spooky variety, not, of the sort of like necessarily chills on my spine, kind of like I've got to get out of here. But I have to say I am a believer in them, and I've had a lot of interesting sort of I would say non-ordinary reality experiences where like there's some, I feel like, connection to some other side that isn't visible to, the human eye, most humans' eyes.
Wow. Folks, we've got about five. I have a couple more questions for Lauren. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. But I'm delighted to keep going about ghost towns. Are there any ghost towns that are either California or West Coast ghost towns that are on your next, like you've got to get to?
Yeah, there's one in Southern California that I can't remember its name, and it's honestly just because it's like God, it's a really popular one. I'll have to look it up. That I've never been to, that I'd really like to go to, but was just like a little bit too far for this one. And then there's a really interesting one that's kind of between San Francisco and San Jose, but you can only get there, like it's in the middle of sort of protected marshland, and so you can only get there, and it's been looted a lot, so you can only see it. You can actually go, you can only see it by train. So anytime I find out that you can't go somewhere, of course, I want to go there,
To go.
Yeah.
Okay, is it
Calico.
Drawbridge or Calico?
I think yes, Drawbridge. Gary's here. Hey, Gary. Yes, exactly. Drawbridge is the one that you can't get to. Although maybe Gary and I are gonna. Gary, let's go.
Break in?
And then I think Calico, yes, is the one in Southern California that I'm dying to go to.
When did this kind of fascination with ghost towns begin for you?
Hmm.
And it
I
seems like
think,
a fascination to me only because, you're writing for Alta recently.
yeah.
It's been all ghost towns, all Lauren.
Yeah. No, no, no. It's totally been a fascination. I am really, really fascinated by the way we narrate the past. I really, my next book, which is called In Memorial, which is out in February, is about, it's actually about climate grief and the art of memorial, but it's looking at like embodied memory, how human beings kind of, and memorial is this explicit, like we want to remember, we're going to build something to remember often an atrocity or a loss or a big, momentous, loss. um and I feel like ghost towns are almost the inverse of that. They're sort of a cementing of memory. The Parks Department, which now runs Bodie, says that the town has been preserved in a state of arrested decay. That is to say that like we want it to look, we've preserved it, but the decay is part of the preservation. Like, we didn't restore it, right, to what it looked
Right.
like. We didn't make it a Disneyland amusement park. It's a shabby chic, Disneyland
And
amusement.
they're not letting it decay more.
Exactly. And they're not letting it decay more. So it's like we have halted it. And it's interesting. I write, in my book about that's a lot of which is based in Greece, and it's about borders. It's called A Map of Future Ruins. My most recent book, I write about how the same thing is true of the Parthenon and the Acropolis in Greece, right? There is a whole thousands of years that space has been so many different things, but they chose, and Daniel Mendelsohn has written beautifully about this in the New Yorker and elsewhere, that like the Greeks have chosen to sort of say, no, this is from the golden age of Pericles. That is when, never mind that it was also a mosque, that it was also an arms repository, that also the Nazis, had it for a while, like were in command of it for a while. Like we're going to remember it from this particular place in time. So I would say that it's like my fascination with ghost towns is particular to my, I think, California heritage and my sort of grappling with the implications of being a white, descended from pioneers, a white, Californian of many generations. My reckoning with the way I was taught history and having to kind of exercise that, which I write about a lot in the piece with Salem. She's also like a several generation Californian, who's white. So like, understanding that past, excavating that past, reckoning with it, reckoning with the mythologies that we've kind of metabolized, from family systems, from the culture. But I'm also really interested in like the built environment and how humans look to or utilize or lean on the built environment to make meaning of the past, and sometimes twist meaning of the past.
David asks, have you visited Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park near Bakersfield? It's an African-American pioneer town.
No, that sounds fascinating. I honestly don't even think I knew about that.
Add that to your list. Gina
Yeah.
wants to know, do you encounter people living in or near ghost towns grappling with the chemical legacy of the mining era? Here in Napa County, we have lots of decommissioned quicksilver mines.
Yep.
I always wonder what's going on in the ecosystem as a result of that history.
Okay. That, honestly, some of that we had to take out of the piece, but the Bodie, absolutely, there was like a ton of state level and county level remediation that had to happen there because of all the chemicals used. Salem, by the way, is from Napa County. And we go to Malakoff Diggins is in Napa County, right? I think. Yes, Malakoff Diggins.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Malakoff Diggins had to so there's like the legacy of the ghost town, you know, isn't just a historical memory one, it's an actual like ecosystem legacy
Mm.
as well.
Makes sense. Um, all right, Lauren, I love your passion for this and excitement. I learned so much
Thank
about
you.
ghost towns. I really had a
Hire me for your how many ghost town stories can one lady write for one magazine? We'll find out.
let's find out. It really changed I had my Disney-fied version of ghost towns, and this was really eye-opening. Just both of your kind of journeys on what they mean to you and your lens on them. So thank you so much for sharing them with Alta's readers and Alta Live's viewers. It was wonderful to welcome you today.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely to be here.
Folks, join us next week. We are welcoming author Nick Hornby. You might know him from writing About a Boy, High Fidelity. He'll be in conversation with our editorial director, Blaise Zariga, about his new book, a collection of his columns from the Believer magazine's Days in Las Vegas. So that is November 6th, I think is a week from today at 12:30. Again, Lauren Markham, repeat Alta Journal contributor and author, and we will send you links to all of this later this afternoon. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.